you lose weight when you're training for something of this degree, you will end up injured and underfueled, like no two ways about it. So yeah, if you're somebody who is weighing yourself, not that I would recommend doing that often, but if you're like losing a lot of weight through your training cycle, you do not want to be doing that during the cycle. You're going to for sure end up injured and your performance is going to plummet at that point too.
Welcome to the Buffalo Marathon Podcast. Let's go!
Where else would you rather be than right here, right now?
I feel like I am part of Bills Mafia. You know, the Go Bills is just part of my vocabulary.
All right, we're here with episode 3 with Shannon Wilson, registered dietitian. She can talk a little bit about her background. Shannon, welcome to the Buffalo Marathon Podcast.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I have been a registered dietitian now, I think, for about 11 years. And I became a CSSD, which is a dietitian who specializes more in sports, probably within the last 2 or 3 years I got that credential, but I've been working with athletes my entire career. So I'm really excited to be here and talk more about sports fueling.
I think they're missing one of your biggest accolades is working with me.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yes, I did do a nutrition programming for Run Smart. Yeah.
And you had to deal with me as a client as well. So I know you probably can't disclose that. So I'll just bring it up. So I've worked with Shannon for many years. It's helped me a ton. Shannon, you've done Buffalo. Talk about like a little bit of your sports background. I always think, as a physical therapist, my athletes always loved that I was a runner because they quote unquote, like they always told me like, you get it. You're a runner as well. So talk a little bit about your background in running. You've run Buffalo half, I believe. So maybe tell us a little about that.
So I have been playing sports ever since I was 3-4 years old. My main sport was always soccer growing up, but I did play almost every sport under the sun. And then I played soccer through college, but when that ended, I just didn't know where to turn athletically anymore. And then I started getting into half marathons, and I do quite a few half marathons. I do love that. So I've just been doing half marathons ever since I graduated college, pretty much.
I feel like that's like the natural, there's gotta be so many people listening that, you know, you get past like collegiate sports or even like cutting sports. And at some point you're like, this is going to start getting dangerous at some point, and you make the natural transition to running. Did you like running as a kid, or was it more of a form of punishment? Because like I grew up as like chase a ball around a field. Running wasn't my favorite. And then I caught the bug later in life. Was that very similar for you?
No, I think I did like running, even like for training for soccer, because I knew it was going to make me such like a better soccer player the more I put into it. So I was always looking to like get better at everything, and like running makes me feel calmer. So I think I always actually did like running, which is why it kind of felt natural to progress into it.
Okay. And then your clientele, a lot of runners, a mix of different types of athletes. What does it usually build up of?
I have a good mix. I have quite a few runners, but I also have a lot of team sport athletes, some rowers, swimmers, but a lot of like team sport, like volleyball, soccer, baseball, softball, all different sports.
One of the things I liked about working with you is there's obviously, in the age of social media, there's so many different takes on things and trends that come and go. It seems like all roads lead back to very similar concepts. Do you feel like that kind of stayed true over the years, where, you know, a carb's a carb and all these different things? Or what have you seen over the years as far as the transition between, you know, fueling and sport, and particularly like endurance sports?
One thing I really love about the endurance sports fueling world is like the sciences remain true year after year, right? So there's like a lot of similar concepts, like making sure we're eating enough carbs, like the science behind like fueling and refueling, how we're fueling during the runs and things like that. Like the sciences continue to like back up like the recommendations we've been making for years. So I like that it's stayed consistent over time.
Yeah. One thing that I remember talking to you about when we built our program was a majority of runners, I feel like, and you can tell me this is wrong or not, but interacting with runners, they feel like their fueling is pretty good. And when you maybe look into it, they're just really missing out on certain aspects because like, oh, I'm doing enough, and they're missing like core components of like either testing their fueling or getting enough in. Do you feel like that's pretty similar across the board for a lot of runners? They equate like, oh, I eat healthy, so I'm good on my fueling.
Yeah, I think a lot of runners, when they initially start working with me, they'll be like, oh, like I'm eating like all these veggies and I'm like building these like really, high fiber like meal bowls and things like that. And like at a base, like if you take the runner out of the equation, their nutrition is really sound and they're super nutrient dense. But there's certain things you have to do as a runner in the sports world where it doesn't follow like mainstream nutrition guidance. And I think that's where a lot of runners kind of get caught up in it because there's a lot of things you have to do that might not follow things you might hear on social media or things, but it's things that really are going to support your running.
Yeah, so let's start there with like biggest fueling mistakes working with runners. What are you seeing as like that top level mistake that whether they're newer, which majority of people who are taking on like the Buffalo half and full are newer runners. What's the number one mistake you constantly see?
Honestly, the biggest thing I see is people are chronically underfueled. They'll come in and be like, I'm eating so much. And like, yeah, they might be eating 3 meals and like 3 snacks a day, but the quantities at each of those are not in line with the training volume that they're doing. And in turn, they're like getting tired, they're getting injured, like they're not hitting the times they want. So I would say like first and foremost, just like not hitting nutrient like calorie goals.
And not I know you're always, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I took from this is it's a delicate balance of like, you really don't need to be counting calories and logging everything, maybe as a starting point, but it can become a little bit of an issue, especially if you have, like myself, have an addictive personality and you start to get into the weeds of it. But at face value, you mentioned just like you're tired and things, but how do you know if you're like chronically underfueled or if you're even in the short term just not giving your body what it needs for training and life in general?
There's like a lot of signs and symptoms that like your body's not getting what it needs. Like it can be things as simple as like having a hard time to like falling asleep and staying asleep. It could be like when you stand up out of your chair, you're getting dizzy. Like there's a lot of small signs and symptoms that your body will like just point at. Like if you're somebody who menstruates, like losing your period here and there, like these are all huge red flags that we're not hitting our calorie or nutrient goals.
Do you feel like there's like, let's say you go for like a long run or you have a big volume. Like, so right now it's end of February, we're going into March. People are doing, modest runs for the half, the full starting to get up there, saying like, oh, you're out of energy, you're tired. But like, how do you balance that mindset with, well, I work a full-time job, I have 3 kids and I ran 20 miles on Saturday. So of course I'm tired.
I think it's looking kind of like at your week, like that makes sense, right? Like if you're doing all those things, you're gonna probably have some low energy stuff going on, depending on like your sleep patterns and things. Like you can only do so much per 24 hours. Maybe sometimes like people do get confused with that where they're like, oh, I think I'm just tired because of my life. And they might not even realize that they are underfueling. They might just chalk it up to that. So I do think there's just, that being said, a lot of runners who are running around underfueled and just like chalking it up to things going on in their life. I do think that happens. And like they don't even realize they are underfueled.
So without counting, like how do you figure out? Because I think no matter what you're going to do with a runner, especially, the runners I've worked with, as they've gone up in ability and finish times and things, they become more dialed in on this nutrition aspect, or they think they're more dialed in. But I feel like people get more restrictive because they equate, if I weigh a little bit less, I'll run a little bit faster. How do you, without counting and knowing exactly how much you're supposed to be taking in to like meet your needs, is it just signs and symptoms that like, oh, I'm not tired? Or I know people are going to struggle with, how much am I supposed to be eating for this training cycle?
Yes. So I normally guide people towards performance plates. So you can look them up online. There's like an easy, moderate, and hard plate. The moderate plate, you'll see like a third of the plate is full of carbohydrates, about a quarter of the plate is protein, and another third's vegetable. And that would be for somebody who's maybe running about an hour at a moderate-ish intensity. Or maybe you have like kind of an easy run and a lift, something like that. And then the hard plate, it graduates up to half plate carbohydrate, quarter plate protein, quarter plate veg. And that's like if you have really long runs, you're doing 2 higher intensity workouts in a day, something like that. So I kind of use that to teach them how to eyeball it, to kind of stay away from like that calorie counting type of stuff, not to put so much pressure around it.
do you feel like there's an issue with using the scale to look at these things for a runner and kind of tracking them? Like, am I losing weight? Am I gaining weight? How do you factor the scale into that? Because that's kind of like, I feel like the thing most like everyone in the world goes to is like, what's my weight? And that kind of tells me where things are at.
Yes. And honestly, it's funny you bring that up. I've had people come to my practice who have been like, I'm training for a marathon or a half marathon, but their goal around that is to lose weight. And when we are training for a half full marathon, if we're like in season for any sport, weight loss can never be part of the goal. If you lose weight when you're training for something of this degree, you will end up injured and underfueled. Like, no two ways about it. So yeah, if you're somebody who is weighing yourself, not that I would recommend doing that often, but if you're like losing a lot of weight through your training cycle, you do not want to be doing that during the cycle. You're going to for sure end up injured and your performance is going to plummet at that point too.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I always talk about with runners, because dealing with the injury side so often, is two things. One, the body hates like drastic change. So if you're just dumping weight, chances are, is it fair to say you're probably dumping fat, you're dumping muscle, you're dumping a lot of things because you're underfueled, would you say, if you're losing a lot of weight through the process?
Yeah, that's fair to say. And like probably also like a lot of water weight, because if you're not eating enough, you're not filling up those glycogen stores, so you're not going to hold as much water. You're going to be more likely to muscle cramp too, which is not great.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. So you mentioned like not being weight loss is the goal through that. And I think one thing that I would add is I often see people, especially, it's easier to do. Like when you're in your 20s, you get away with a lot. And if you wanted to lose weight by training for a marathon, it's going to be more tolerable than if you're in your 50s. You're saying no. But
I say no.
I think the body's going to tolerate it and be way more flexible on the injury realm with how, what's the word I'm looking for? It's going to be more responsive or adaptable to that change. Whereas someone in their 50s who has maybe some older injuries, they have some crusty knees, and I see them try to get in shape by running. I feel like even if your diet is great there, the body might not tolerate that well. So one of the things I always think of is like, we tell people you need to get in shape to run sometimes. So improving your cardiovascular endurance, improving your strength can help you in that transition. So when we have people like, well, you're going to, working with runners, they're going to probably end up doing it anyway. So we try to transition them into a safer mindset or a safer plan. So we'll say, hey, instead of, the 5 days a week you want to run to get in shape faster and do all these things, you're at a super high injury risk. So what we want to do is we're going to get you more fit through low impact type things. And then we're going to tincture up the running a little bit at a time. But you seem, based on your body language, you didn't like the comment that the younger athletes are going to tolerate it more. So go ahead.
I mean, yes, I think like, I'm sure if you're like in your 50s versus in your 20s, like you might be able to like push through it more in your 20s and maybe not have as high of an injury risk based on what you just said about how the body adapts. But from like an internal standpoint, it's still going to do a lot of, it's still going to cause a lot of issues hormonally, still potential loss of period. And even if you aren't injured for that race, I do think it increases your overall injury risk, like moving forward, like maybe even like stuff they're working through. Like I see a lot of younger runners like pushing through injuries when like someone who's maybe older would like take the time to go to PT and like heal before continuing to push themselves. So I still think it impacts them. I wonder if mindset's different with younger runners.
Yeah, you mentioned, and this is interesting to kind of go off on a side tangent here, but being amenorrheic, losing your period, is that something that is kind of correlated to more of the extreme side of underfueling, or can it be a small dose? Because I see college level, highly talented and almost that elite professional level where they'll go into that realm and end up having a lot of problems from it, stress fractures, different things. Is that like a sign of like gross underfueling, or can that be, no, like you're just underfueled consistently for a long time?
Yeah, it really can be just like a lot of athletes that I have that come to see me who have the amenorrhea issue, some of them like are very confused because they're like, I'm eating. Like some of them don't realize they're not like how like under their needs they're eating. So I think a lot of times it's very accidental. And it's really just like, it's just like chronic underfueling any which way you look at it. Some people are doing it intentionally, and that might look a little bit more severe from like that point of view, but whether you mean to or not, if you're in that big of an energy deficit that your body's choosing to not allow your body to have a period. And that's another thing. Not every athlete who restricts in that way loses their period too. So not everyone who's in a deficit loses their period, but it is a pretty common symptom.
Yeah. I think there's this interesting thing that I've been seeing happen lately. And I actually, there's two sides of like social media, and one part of it is like, there's a ton of bullshit about people talking about subjects that they don't know about. But one thing I can start to see, which is really interesting to me, is you're starting to see more of this hybrid athlete come along. And I see a lot more like physique wise, 10 years, 15 years ago, you'd be like, oh, that person is not a runner. They're a gym rat and they're strong, but they don't have any cardiovascular endurance. I feel like you're starting to see a bigger emphasis on strength training. I don't know if you're experiencing anything like that with more about this hybrid athlete type of athlete than just like that traditional skinny runner.
I have seen that, and I think it's good because I think all different types of bodies can run, and I think incorporating that strength work is helping reduce injuries and things like that too. So I don't know what you think from a PT standpoint, but I like to see like that all different types of people are like getting into running.
Yeah, I love seeing the stronger folks do it, because at first you would see like, oh, this person's they're carrying like way too much lean muscle to be a fast runner, and then this is starting to get broken. Do you know who Truett Haynes is?
Sorry, I do not. No.
That's okay. So he won the pull-up, or he has the world record for pull-ups. He did 10,001 pull-ups in 24 hours. Wow. It's very strong. He came in fourth in the Austin Marathon at like a 2:36, but he's got a lot of muscle to him. He also did it in denim, like full jeans. So his like shtick is he keeps racing marathons in jeans. Wow. And he ran a 2:36 full denim, but he carries around muscle, which is, I feel like 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't see a lot of that. You would see more of that, quote unquote, skinny, not strong runner, which I feel like is what people need to get away from is this idea and concept, because like you can be quote unquote skinny, but very, very weak. And I think that's where a lot of runners get into trouble.
100. I agree with that 100%. Yeah.
You mentioned in those power plates about carbs, proteins, fats. Can we just talk about those? And I don't want to put into context of like how much do you need, but what's the focus of those three things? How do they play off each other? And what's like the importance of each one to a runner?
So carbohydrates are obviously like our gold standard. Like that's the macronutrient group that you're going to need the most of. When we eat carbohydrates, it turns into glycogen. It's stored in your muscles, and that's what your body's accessing, whether you go for a walk, you're doing a run, lifting a weight. It's like our main fuel source. If we're not eating enough carbohydrate, but say we're really focusing in on protein, you're going to have this sparing effect where the protein's actually going to break down into glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis, because there's no carbohydrate available, and then you don't build your muscles up as well. So carbohydrates are like the main thing. They're super important. You obviously need all three, but carbs are the main one. Protein's really important, especially like spread evenly throughout the day. That's probably the big thing with protein, is eating the right total amount, but then spreading that evenly throughout the day, and then prioritizing, especially in our recovery. And then fats are obviously also important. Those are really good for inflammation, satiety, all those types of things. So they all have a pretty big role, I would say, for the runner.
There's a big push right now with like crazy amounts of protein. So I've heard all the way up to like 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. Where I just said prior to this statement that we won't talk about amounts, but any take on consumption of that? And like, that's one thing I see coming around is like 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. It's hard to get to, but you can shoot for, around that amount, and that's enough. Any kind of idea on that?
I've heard that range spoken to of, well, I normally do like 1.6 to, I guess you could go up to 2, as long as you're not eating so much protein that it's like affecting how much carbohydrate or fats that you're eating. Like if you can maintain the right amounts of all those things and still hit that number, I don't think it's going to necessarily hurt you. My fear is that sometimes protein is so satiating. If you're eating like really high amounts of it at a meal, are you going to have enough room for those carbohydrates that your body really, really needs to? There's also just been this huge movement with protein where we're putting protein in everything. And I don't know that we need to be doing that as a society, like, putting them in Pop-Tarts and putting it in cereal. And like, I do think we're getting like a little overboard and putting protein in everything. It's important.
The other thing I just have a question on is like added sugar, things like that. That's a big thing that I've seen going around. Obviously, you need some of this stuff as you're loading up for maybe a long run and stuff. But when someone's like, we open up a label, we look at the back of it, should runners be concerned about added sugar? How should they be thinking about just that in general? Because it seems like it's everywhere. And then there's also this other side of the argument where everyone's like, I'm looking for 0 grams of added sugar in what I'm eating. Where do you stand on that?
I think this is like a really hard concept for people. So when we're running, obviously, like in that pre-run, especially 30 to 60 minutes before, we want like a simple carbohydrate. And that's going to come in the form of like, we can do like dried mango or banana, but this also going to be like nerd clusters. It could be Swedish fish, gummies, like they all break down to the same thing. So like in that sense, like they're great. Like you can include them during the run that way. I think people get like, feel weird about added sugars, like maybe outside of their workouts too. Like I do hear a lot of people be saying things along the lines like, oh, I couldn't stop eating like the cookies or like this product or this or that. So sometimes it's people's relationship with food. They just have a bad relationship with those items, and maybe they weren't allowed to eat those things when they were younger. They just like have certain conceptions about them. But then other people too aren't hitting their needs throughout the day, and they get to the end of the day and they're starving. And when we're starving, we're going to have food cravings. So I wouldn't say they're inherently good or bad. I think they have a place in our diets. It's just from a running standpoint, how we're going to use them to like benefit our run kind of thing.
Yeah. So you're on the team nerd clusters. These have been going around like crazy. They're so good.
They're so good.
But I've seen people use them pre-run, during run.
Yes.
And I know when they're in my house, like I don't even like having them in the house because like they're not bad relationship with food or not. They're so good. I'm like, oh my God, these are bad. I saw a study like that. It's like from what I understand, it's like a nerd rope cut up, basically. Yep. And it like saved like the entire brand. Like it outpaced all of their other candy combined. But you're on Team Nerd Cluster. Yeah,
I think they're easy. They taste good. You're getting the fat.
They taste amazing. Correction.
They do taste amazing. So yeah, I think they're a great like pre or during fuel source if you tolerate. I think those are great.
Yeah. From like let's go into carbohydrates a little bit more. We're going to talk about during run and like throughout the week, but just, is there a difference between the type of carbohydrate, the type of fuel? Because like, I know that there's a lot of, every gel that's coming out is like, oh, we do it differently. There's this bicarb system. There's different things coming out. Is a carb? Is there different ways that it gets absorbed that make it one carb better than another? Different types of gels. I'm confused about it. And I have one that works for me, which I continue to use. But, there's always the next brand that's coming out saying they're better than the last.
So I think when it comes to, like, we're just talking about carbs within gels, I think, yes, a bunch of them are formulated different ways. But I think at the end of the day, you have to experiment, right? So like they have maple syrup ones, they have honey ones, they have ones that are formulated that you don't need to take water with them. So I think it's like buying a bunch of them and trialing them out on your runs and seeing which one works better for you, because truly everyone's individual. You could have like the gold standard gel with you. I don't even know what that one would be, because I don't think there is one, because everyone tolerates things different. But I know people who swear by like Huma gels, but then I have people who are like, I don't like the texture, or, there is one time where you're not supposed to do this. You're supposed to always like practice with your gels beforehand. But there was one that was like pure maple syrup pretty much in a gel form. Mm-hmm. I tried it for the first time. It was like so sweet. I couldn't finish it during my race, and it kind of threw me off a little. So I think the biggest thing with gels is like trialing a bunch of them and figuring out which one works best.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. And as people get into their long runs, trialing is so important. And I say the same thing with like shoes. Like you're not matching your shoes to the outfit. You don't want to find like the cute fit because, you want to match from head to toe on race day. You need to use what worked throughout training. The same thing goes with nutrition. So let's say you're going out for a long run on Saturday. When do you start thinking, like obviously you're going to do stuff throughout the week, but let's talk about getting ready for your longest run yet. That's on Saturday. When do you start thinking about it? And let's say, for sake of argument, it's going to take you about 2.5 hours. How far out do you start thinking about it? How do you start getting ready for that run?
So if it's like within your training cycle, I'll have a lot of my clients practice their carb loads, right? So if it's going to be a really long training run, that might be like a really good opportunity to practice a carb load. And if we're going to do that, we'll start increasing total carb 2 to 3 days out from that planned run. Using certain formulas I can tell you the numbers if you want, but to get up to like 8 to 12 grams per kilogram of carbohydrate leading up to that. But if it's
So
just like
then-
a normal run, you would keep your overall carb intake high as you normally would. And just, it should be consistent across the board. If you're training for something like a marathon, it should always be a high level carb intake day to day, no matter what.
Is there a way to, without getting fancy numbers involved in calculating how much grams of carbs you need? I've done it, and I basically know just eat until I'm almost sick of carbohydrates. But that's probably not the most scientific way to do it. But what do you, like someone that's like, I don't want to do the math, just give me a sense of like how I should be feeling or how I should be carb loading.
I think with carb loads, that is one place where you might have to do the math because it's
Okay.
so hard to get up to those numbers. And I think you have to get strategic with it because the amount of carb you have to eat, sometimes you do have to add in like juices or things like that to like bring yourself up there because the quantity can be so high sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like that's the one thing that I found was I needed to add juice because I couldn't eat enough carbs to get there. So the apple juices were always really good. And then honestly, I know I'm there when I'm like, I love carbs and I'm like, I can't eat another carb. Like I'm heavy with carbs. The concept with that too, we don't want to be focused on the scale, but if someone happens to step on it, they're going to notice an increase in weight, right? Because water's going to follow that carb.
Yeah, because you're storing all that additional carbohydrate, like to fill up the glycogen storage is the whole point. But with each gram of glycogen, we're storing 4 grams roughly of water. So yeah, you should see the scale go up after doing a carb load if you're weighing yourself.
Yeah, one thing that I found, and obviously everyone wants to practice, one thing that I found, especially the day before, is I like to front weight it. It works really well with me. So like I'll have a really big breakfast and then I get smaller in lunch and smaller in dinner, especially the night before, so that I have the most time to digest and I'll do something early in the morning. But I think the important thing is to prep it. And if we can say it at like the simplest form, this is going to basically fill the gas tank. So when your muscles need to contract, they have what they need, but that is a reserve store. And it takes, anywhere between a day or 2, 3 days to fill those things up. So I think it's important to talk about when you're on that run. And correct me if I'm wrong, roughly most people have around 90 minutes of stored carbohydrate. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're going for a 3-hour run or a 2-hour run, you certainly don't want to hit that quote unquote wall where you bonk, because that means you're depleting your glycogen and you're falling apart. So we think about, obviously we want to practice, but how do we think about during run nutrition, or maybe even right before we start? I think the mindset is, well, it's a 90-minute run and I did some good carb loading, so I'm good, versus fueling through the end, or it's 2 hours, it's an extra 30 minutes. I don't really need to fuel through that run. So let's just talk about that during run fueling.
Yeah. So, and that's a good point. So like the next day after you finish your carb load, and it's like the morning of your run, you're still going to have like a full breakfast about 3 hours out. And then you could even do like another simple carb snack before you get into the run. And then typically everyone has a different way they do the during run. If we're training for a marathon, we're probably going to be averaging about 90 grams of carbs per hour. And so you do want to practice that. So even if it only is like a 2 hour, as I say, only 2 hours, like a long time to run, like a 2-hour run, yeah, maybe we don't need the 90 gram of carb per hour, but it's really good to practice with that during through like using gels and different endurance beverages. Like they have different like carb electrolyte beverages you can use too to get up to those amounts. But any opportunity my clients have to practice, I like tell them to go for it, because you want to understand how all these foods work in your system when you're running.
Yeah. So the 90 grams is something I want to talk about, because I feel like the number just keeps going up. I've been doing this for a while, and it went from like barely fueling to like, hey, take a gel an hour. Now you're getting into the realm of like 2, 3, 3.5 gels an hour. Is obviously you're going to want to work up, but is the research kind of sitting around that 90 at this point? Is it a lot of like anecdotal, like this is what we're seeing, what's working? Where does the 90 come from?
A lot of that's research that's been done in the last several years indicating that 90 gram per hour is what's offsetting that as your glycogen stores are emptying, that's kind of keeping you having the energy you need to complete that race without hitting a wall. That's the number they found where people aren't hitting a wall with. If you can complete a marathon in under like 2.5 hours, you could do more like 60 grams of carb per hour. But I think the average runner is probably 2.5 hours or upward for a full marathon for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the average time right now is like 4 hours and 30 minutes for the average human.
Yes.
So they're out there for a while. I've seen people at a high level professionally, and I've spoken to some of them. They're like 120, 130 an hour. They're doing 100-mile races and things, so they're out there for a while. So that's a lot. And I think that does take a lot of practice. Let's talk about, it's not just gels, or maybe I've talked to runners that mix it up. Like they have gels, but they get sick of them at a certain point, so they switch to something else. But it's also, you can get carbs from drinks. So what are the typical ways outside of a gel? Find one that works for you. Runner's Roost has a bunch of them, but what are other practical ways that people can get carbs in that's not a gel?
There's like a lot of different electrolyte beverages out. Like Scratch has one that comes in like a big bag, and you can do several scoops of like a certain type of electrolyte drink into a water bottle to get your carbs up. There's some that have like really high carbs. Like I think Scratch has one that has like 100 grams of carb per one serving of it, which that would get you up there. Obviously, Tailwind is another brand that has a bunch of good ones. So you can, there's like a lot of, again, I would like look and start experimenting with the different ones, but I would pick one that has like carbohydrate content in it. A lot of people are into, and there's nothing against this product, but like Element Tea has a ton of salt in it, 1,000 milligrams, but it has like no carbohydrate. So like that one might not be a great one to have unless you have additional carb that you know you're actually hitting your needs with it as well.
Do you find like people are doing outside of the drink and outside of gels, like candy, dried fruit, like what can they do in that realm?
Yeah, I've seen people use candy, dried fruit, dates are a big one. A lot of people are like, I think dates are having its moment, maybe. Maybe they're having a comeback. I think a lot of people are starting to use dates again. I've even seen people like if they tolerate, it's not maybe the most recommended because we want to stick mostly with carb, but I have seen people do like Uncrustables or like Cliff Bars, things that do have a little bit of protein and fat. But kind of circling back to what you were alluding to in the beginning, some people like think they can't tolerate fuel during. So to go from like no fuel during to 90 grams sounds really scary to a lot of people. So sometimes you do have to train your gut to get up to that level. So like you might not start right at 90 grams when you're doing these training runs. Maybe you start with like 30 grams and start slowly working your way up so your gut can tolerate it. But that's another thing. So if you never fuel during, going from 0 to 90 might feel scary a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like this is one area where things have gotten better, but it's still really undervalued on fueling during the run, because that later stage when the wheels just fall off, for the most part, if you can train yourself up to keep, nothing's going to replace if you go out like a bat out of hell up Delaware Ave and you just blow up early. But if you pace right, you put all this time in, but you don't fuel through that run, like I feel like it's such an easy thing to work on and fix that people can really practice and just be better with. And if you're not practicing, I think what you mentioned was really important, which is if you're going on an 8-mile run, you can easily just keep training your gut through those runs. And, are you fueling for a long run? No, but you're training your gut. I just personally feel like that's one area where runners can just get a lot of benefit on race day. And before we came on today, we were talking about this, and I was not going to bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up anyways now because why not? Which is like mid-run crashes. And this is still out there, but we were talking about blood glucose. I was talking about it. You were listening to me, but we were talking about blood glucose. And one of the things that is starting to be researched is just how this affects overall general malaise, fatigue, later stages of running. And there's some research coming out now that it's not that you've depleted these resources, so like your blood glucose is dropping and it can't dump more into the blood, and you can start to get fatigued and tired. So you can get these shots of, ideally you wouldn't get there, but if you're starting to work through a really tough stage of a run, trying to just put these carbs into the system and put fuel into the system can help bring you back, and you can keep fueling through that. So I think it's just something that you have to figure out what works for you. But at the end of the day, I've seen a lot of runners, and I've been here where like you hit the wall. Have you ever hit the wall, Shannon?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
All right.
In my early half, absolutely. Before I knew what I was
Okay.
doing, yeah.
I've hit the wall a few times, and there's this general sense, and hopefully someone that's listening to this, if you do experience this, because someone will hit the wall at the full marathon, just try to get some calories in and see how your body responds to it. And even if you're on a long run, trying it and see if you can come back from it, because there's some preliminary research just looking at like just a spike in your blood sugar can actually bring you back mentally. And I was telling Shannon before we started, when you watch ultras, these people are doing anywhere between 50 to 240 miles, 300 miles, and they'll go from death's door, and they might be hallucinating, but that's from a sleep issue. But they'll go from like just general fatigue malaise, and they get some Coke in the system, Coca-Cola in the system. And I was joking, that's not the other type, but they get some Coca-Cola in the system, they get some sugar, and they get this surge of energy. And you see them come back 15 minutes later from like death's door to re-energize. And they did not restore any energy. They didn't fill up their muscle stores, or didn't fill up their glycogen stores. So it's something to try and work with. And it'd be interesting to see where this plays out. So I don't know if you have anything to add to it since it's so early on.
I want to read more of the research, but it does make a lot of sense the way it's being described. So it never hurts to add more in. And the research it sounds like the research is starting to support that. So it sounds promising.
One of the ways that I was thinking about it, which I thought was interesting, is I used to use this analogy and it had nothing to do with nutrition, but when a runner would approach a hill, a lot of them like to push it up the hill and get over it. And the way I think about it mentally is, if you think about your liver and is when it senses like, hey, you're going to start working hard because you're going uphill, you're trying to maintain pace, it's going to start dumping glycogen into the bloodstream and glucose into the bloodstream, right? And it's going to start dumping it in anticipation of what's happening. And I was just thinking through like, you shouldn't do that. So as you're running up a hill, like you want to, even it on the up and the downs, but it could be an opportunity there to practice. And I'm going to start practicing, which is, can I give a shot like on those harder efforts? And the reason why I say that is because we used to use this analogy, like you have a matchbox of how many of matches, and every time you spike your heart rate, it's like striking a match, and eventually you run out of matches. So we used to do this in Ironman where we did like Placid, and you'd hit a hill, and if you hammered, it was like striking a match, and eventually you run out of matches. So it kind of coincides with this idea of like, if you just keep forcing your body to like sense a hard effort and it keeps dumping glucose into the bloodstream, it might not necessarily be needed if it already knew it was there and flowing. So I don't know. I'm excited to see where that whole area goes, because I've just seen so many athletes just go from different levels of energy level so quickly.
And it kind of supports the current recommendations, right? Because we're supposed to be taking in fuel really constantly and consistently. Mm-hmm. So if you are already doing that, like regardless of what that research says, you're already effectively like keeping that piece stable because you're constantly taking in that carb load throughout the run.
Yeah. Interesting story. I was talking to a Kenyan recently, and it's like probably 6 months ago. And I was asking him, because they did like 90 to 120 grams, and he was 220 marathoner, which he said is a slow Kenyan. And I'm like, how do you get that in? He's like, well, at least what I do is I take a gel and I'll just keep it in my mouth and I'll run and I'll just take some as I go. I'm like, oh my God, I couldn't imagine. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't imagine running and just like holding a gel in my mouth for like miles on end, but he was taking one every like 15, 20 minutes. So he couldn't be holding it in there too long, but.
That's quite the strategy. But that's the thing. You kind of learn your own little things that work for you when you're out there too.
Yeah, makes me want to gag. Anyways, let's talk through. You get done with your long run. You want to maximize your recovery. You did a hard effort. Your body's under stress. Let's talk about the window for recovery, if there is one, how do you think about an athlete finishing that long run or finishing like a hard tempo or threshold workout where they put their body through stress?
So I think one of the biggest things I hear runners say in particular, they'll finish a big effort or a long run and they're nauseous. They're not trying to eat anything. Like they need time to kind of unwind and cool down, which fair, but also research is supporting that we do get fuel in within about 30 to 45 minutes, right? We can maybe push a little bit outside that window, but it's ideal to get it in within that time. So at a bare minimum, I ask my runners, like, can we do like a glass of chocolate milk while we're like taking a shower after? Could we make a quick smoothie? Typically, like liquids go down easier if we aren't really hungry following a run. And we always want some type of carbohydrate to replenish glycogen stores and then also that protein. If you only do protein post-run, you're going to have that sparing effect where the protein digests into glucose instead, and then the protein's not going to rebuild muscles. But if people can tolerate actual fuel, I tell them to eat just like a full meal or like a snack that has both carb and protein, like Greek yogurt with granola and fruit or something like that.
Okay. Is there a time window like that's optimal for that? Is it within 90 minutes? Is it within 3 hours that you want to be getting something in? Is it sooner the better?
So I would say sooner the better. Within 30 to 45 minutes is the recommendation.
Yeah.
So I would try and keep it around that 45 minutes.
The one thing that I kind of think of with regard to this is the body is so responsive on what its needs are, and it tends to desensitize and reprioritize itself based on life. So I think of, hey, your body senses and it knows your heart rate's coming down, your enzymes and all these things are happening inside your blood. So it's sensing what's happening. And from what I've read, and you can tell me, no, Steve, you're wrong, which is it's craving the protein. It knows the workout's done, and it knows what it needs at that point. And the carbohydrate can make it more easily accessible for the muscle. And then that the protein and the muscle is more actively looking for the protein after a workout. So would you say that's pretty accurate?
Yeah, it's called an anabolic window, but basically it just means like your body's ready to uptake those nutrients. So if we can get it in at that point when it's like really ready for it, you're going to have a quicker recovery. If you prolong it, you're still going to recover, but maybe not as efficiently. And you might if you wait, like any runner who is not fueled right after they ran and then waited about an hour and a half, like you have pretty intense hunger at that point, which sometimes does not feel super pleasant.
Yeah. You mentioned, I know like there's so many times I'll come back from a long run and just, is there any scientific reason behind the not nauseous, but just not hungry for hours and hours at end? So I'm thinking there's been times where even my wife and I, we do a 20-mile run and, we just don't have an appetite. Like we're not like sick, but we don't have an appetite for like five hours plus. And I'm not sure, is it a sign of underfueling during? Is something that, could be happening to a runner that is causing that? That's not nauseous. It's just no appetite.
And that can be caused when we're running for prolonged amounts of time. Blood flow can actually be cut off from your gut to go to your extremities where like your body's like more or less utilizing that. And that cut off of blood flow can cause that nauseous feeling. You're also just like bouncing and jumping around a lot when you're running. So like it's just like all that movement, your gut might be like a little unsettled, which is also why if we don't practice fuel before so we know how our body tolerates things, you might find yourself in trouble during the race.
As in porta potties?
Yes.
Yeah. I think trying to avoid fiber is a pretty good recommendation on lead up to a long run or even race day.
Yes. Really high fat and really high fiber within 2 hours of like a training race is not the best move. Like some people will be like, oh, I ate like this big bowl of quinoa with like black beans and sweet potatoes and like chicken.
Pre-race or the day before?
Pre-race, day before, either one. But then like when they go out for the run, they're like, it just felt flat. My stomach was bothering me. It's like, although that was super nutrient dense, we probably would have been better off with something like, a big white rice bowl with chicken and something like that. That's like a low fiber carb to fuel that movement.
Is that different with like time? I'm thinking of maybe outside of Buffalo half and full ultra marathoners. They tend to not run at a rate that maybe will burn a lot of glycogen. They're burning some more fat and things. Does that recommendation change with those longer distance races or not really?
There's like obviously a lot of like conversation around like ultra people doing like more like fat as fuel versus carbohydrate, but the research still points to fueling mostly with carbohydrate versus relying solely on fat. So like I still think performance outcomes are improved when they're prioritizing the carbohydrates is what research
Gotcha.
points to.
Okay. The other piece of this, when we talk about recovery, is sleep. And you mentioned it a little bit earlier. I just did a podcast with a gentleman who's like one of the leading sleep researchers. And it reminded me of talking with you because like I would say something and he would look at me like, did you just say that when we first started talking? And we're going to release that one soon. But talk about, there's two things I think that are really undervalued. And I'm really excited about the sleep side because I feel like nutrition's come a long way. Sleep seems like it's got its thing going too. It's like the dates of like other things. So, how do you think about nutrition and sleep? Because they seem like they can be related. He mentioned nutrition a couple of times in our talk, and how really nutrition can drive sleep, and sleep is a big driver of recovery. It's when he always talked about the end of the day when you're going to bed is not the end of the day. It's the start of the next day, and your body's getting ready for the next day, which I loved. How do we think about nutrition and sleep in a really practical way that's, backed with research and something we can use?
So oftentimes I do have my runners do a nighttime snack as long as there's no like acid reflux issues or things like, unless I have a medical issue where like that would actually hurt them. And I try to get them to do something that's like balanced with both like carb and protein, like again, maybe like a Greek yogurt bowl, something with like cottage cheese, just something because protein pre-bed can actually help with muscle protein synthesis as we sleep and things along those lines. And then there's also like some supplements. Again, you'd have to check with your doctors to make sure that like those are safe for you to be using. But a lot of people are using magnesium before bed to promote better sleep. Doing things like tart cherry juice pre-bed also promotes sleep, but also helps with muscle soreness. So you can do like little things like that pre-sleep that might help.
Yeah, he was talking to me about going to bed from a sleep standpoint. No big meals before bed, redirects blood to the gut, things like that. How do you think about like size of snack? He was pretty big on from a sleep only perspective, not fueling your activities to get the most out of your sleep. Going to bed a little bit hungry was his concept. Do you think that changes when we're talking about like the running population or what?
I do think, yeah, especially with the athletic and running population, like I do think, because say you have like dinner at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and then you don't go to bed till like 10, maybe 11, like you're going to get a hunger cue in there. And for the amount of energy your body has expended that day, it's unlikely that you've maybe met your needs by that point. So in a lot of cases, I think a lot of athletes do require that snack.
Yeah.
But
you mentioned hunger cues. I'm thinking of my household and knowing when people are hungry. And I have what I would think of as a hunger cue, but is this just like a Snickers commercial? Like you're not you when you're hungry kind of thing? Or is there other things that people should be looking for?
No. So I think like you mean like nighttime where people like have cravings or things
in
like
general, like, hey, you're being nasty. Go get something to eat.
Yes. Oh yeah. I think we're having like mood problems ish, like in a short amount of time and it's been a while since you ate. Yes. Like for sure not eating because of its effect on like blood glucose stabilization and things like that. You can definitely get a little irritable for sure. If you're not.
My daughter who's 7, we plan all our travel and everything around when's the last time she ate. Yeah, you could tell who calls the shots, but we're like, we need to get her some food in the next 20 minutes because we know what's on the other side of that 20 minutes. So it's always funny just going towards that. You also mentioned supplements and obviously a huge industry, a lot of garbage of different things. Things that come to mind to me are like collagen and things like that. But when you're thinking about this running population, how do you cut through the noise of what, obviously you don't need everything, but how do you think about approaching an athlete with supplements?
I always like do a food first approach, right? So if we can get it through food first, I think that's a great place to start. I think if you live in like the Northeast place that doesn't get a ton of sun, vitamin D is critical. Like I do think pretty much if you're not getting sun year round, you should be on vitamin D. If you're nervous about that, get your blood work checked first because you don't want too high vitamin D levels either, obviously. But I think vitamin D is a big one with the runner community. Another big one that I like to recommend if we're not eating fish twice a week, I almost always recommend some type of omega-3 type supplement because it does help with overall inflammation, which as runners, you are obviously inflamed often through the volume of training you're doing. But outside of that, for like food related supplements, like I pretty much limit it to that unless blood work indicates differently. As runners, I do often have runners check their iron and ferritin levels. You're at a higher risk of iron losses just with that foot strike. There, you lose a little bit more iron as runners too. So that's something I have athletes look at too.
Does that tend to be more related to females as far as like iron and ferritin, or not really?
Not necessarily. Like definitely females are more prone to it since they're also having a menstrual cycle and losing blood once a month. But just like, especially if you're chronically underfueled and you're doing high mileage, even men can totally experience iron and ferritin.
Do you feel like there's resistance when you're working with clients for getting blood work ordered on a relatively, when you look at someone being healthy? Do you feel like there's resistance from the insurance companies, from the physicians to order it? What are you sensing on your end?
I think as on the client, it's almost never, because if they're coming in, they're like presenting like a little fatigued or something, I'm like, oh, it could be this. And then they're very interested in figuring that out. Physicians sometimes, but if I explain to them the science behind it, provide an article, explain the reasoning, they tend to be on board. Sometimes insurance companies won't cover blood work, and that turns into more of a financial situation. Can the client afford it or not? I also don't get too much pushback.
Oh, nice. I've had different varying responses, not me personally, with athletes trying to get things ordered. Interestingly, we're in this world of medicine where so much is becoming like, not only do you pay for your health insurance and then you have a deductible, which you pay for anyways, but then you just pay out of pocket because you're just so fed up with the entire system. So I know like, even like right now, Quest, you can just go buy your vitamin D if the insurance is like, you don't need it, or your doctor doesn't want to order it, you can just go on and buy out of pocket and go and get it done and have it done. So I don't know if you have any athletes going through that route, but I think it is basically just an online purchase and you just schedule an appointment and you don't have to put it through your insurance.
Correct. Yeah, I do think there's a lot of battles with insurance. I think insurance is probably the biggest battle in terms of ordering blood work, because normally like providers are really like, they want their patients, I think, to have that support. It's just a matter of what's covered and what people can afford.
You mentioned vitamin D as being a big one. We're here in Buffalo where we get like 5 days of sun a year. And I think we just got one the other day. So we have 4 more left this year. But I also know when we were experimenting with me, one of the big things was you mentioned that it's fat soluble. So I think it's maybe just talk about what that means and if you're going to take vitamin D.
Yes. And I think that's a good point too. So a lot of people like, they don't know, like, do I need fat in my diet? Things like that. And you do, because there's several fat soluble vitamins that you don't absorb them as well if we don't have fat in our system. So vitamins A, D, E, and K are the fat soluble vitamins. So I always recommend that people eat their vitamin D supplement with a meal that contains some fat, and all your meals should if they're fully balanced. So I always have people take vitamin D with a meal.
Okay. When we think about other things like collagen, other stuff, is like the over-the-counter things or things that are having their date moment, their moment in the sun, and they got a good marketing team behind it. What do you feel like right now, and it could change, but is real versus like hype? Let's start with like collagen.
So collagen's a good one. So that one's like, it's a good example, I should say. So I think if somebody's presenting like with an injury and they have like a tendon ligament injury, they're recovering from surgery, there is research to support that a certain collagen dose can help aid in that injury recovery. Does the average person who's like underfueled, not meeting their basic needs, but is having some like knee pain, if they take a collagen supplement, it's going to like solve their problems? No. So I still say like your foundations need to be in like a really good spot before you start tacking on a bunch of random supplements.
Mm-hmm. What are some other ones?
Creatine. Everyone's really big on creatine right now. It's probably one of the most well-researched supplements out there. I have no problem with my athletes taking it. I just always tell them, make sure you up your water. You don't have to creatine load either. A lot of people are into
dry scoop it.
We don't need a dry scoop. But then also that's another big one. Like if your foundation's not set, like if you're not at a baseline eating enough food, eating enough carbs, proteins, fats, you tack that on, it's not going to do a whole heck of a lot.
So from what I understand with the creatine side, I see it, it supports like fast, quick movements, the creatine itself, but there's been are you seeing like a lot of the research come along with like the neurologic benefits of that? Is that what's happening on your end too?
Yes, I've actually started recommending creatine to any of my athletes who are having concussion. It's part of like the protocol that I set them up with now is to take a creatine dose to support because it can pass that blood-brain barrier, so it can actually help heal that type of stuff, which is good.
Yeah. So, I don't want to get into specific recommendations, but I've seen everything between 5 milligrams a day to 10 milligrams a day with a load. Where do you stand on that?
I think it's likely that there's probably some dose discrepancy dependent on the type, like the size of person. But I would say like a good starting place for most people is like 5 grams. Yeah, you tolerate.
5 grams, not milligrams. Yeah. Sorry, my bad.
Yes. And I would probably start there.
Do you do like a loading phase with that, or you just do 5 a day every day in a shake or water or whatever?
5 every day is good. Good to start there. Yeah. You could start with 3 if you're like nervous about it, but like typically it's well tolerated as long as you up your water. Should be okay.
Yeah. The one thing I've seen with that is like creatine has definitely been everywhere from like talking to people and seeing what people are on. One thing I've seen come on the scene, which I don't know if you have a take on, I'll give you my take and you can either just say nothing or support it or deny it, which is like the gummies and things like that are coming on with like creatine gummies and things. And I look at the scoop of 5 grams of creatine, and then you look at the size of these gummies. Not only would you have to like eat a half of a pouch of gummies to even get something that resembles the scoop size, but I also think about all the heat applied to create a gummy and all these things and what it does to the creatine itself. It seems like in its rawest form is the way to go versus finding all these different snacks and ways to get it.
Yeah, the gummies, their research, I do think there's been studies to support that like the gummies aren't as potent as like doing just like the powder form.
Yeah. Do you have anything else besides collagen, creatine that you've seen a lot come on with?
Probably the magnesium glycinate is probably the other biggest one, taken pre-bed to help with sleep quality. As long as there's no, again, with all these, as long as there's no like med interactions and things like that, helps with sleep quality, helps with muscle relaxation. Magnesium has over like 300 enzymatic actions in our body, and a lot of people are deficient in it.
Yeah.
So that supplement's having its moment, I would say too, a little bit. But again, these are all just like fancy things. Like I think nutrition, like food is probably going to be like focusing in on that first is going to be your best bet. And then if you want to optimize later on, you can always tack these things on. Yeah,
I think that is super important to just emphasize because like if you're not getting enough, like what's the supplement going to do for you? The one thing that do you have any, I see this with a little bit of my older athletes, but the chondroitin joint protective stuff has kind of, for the most part, is phased out a little bit for me, but I don't know if you have any experience on that as well.
I've seen it a little bit, but typically when somebody has that, it's because they have like a runner's knee thing or something like that. And I find that my folks that like actually go to PT and like work on strengthening around their knee and like doing all those things, like that's going to heal and resolve it in the long term more than just taking this supplement. I guess someone who has like bone on bone or something like that with no relief, and this is giving them relief versus getting it. So I don't know.
Yeah. There's a surgeon I talked to. Well, 2 things, like the chondroitin things that you can get, the joint protective supplements, they've been shown to do no more than just like a daily aspirin or whatever. And most of the time from what I've seen, I haven't looked at the current literature, but the literature when I looked at it, 4 or 5 years ago was very much placebo driven, and you could take an aspirin and get the same effect occasionally. And it was funny because the surgeon I was talking to about this, his go-to was the placebo effect is the desired effect. So whatever. So I just haven't seen it come across much. It seems like it's died down, but I didn't know if you had any experience with that. When you think about runners in general, if you had to give, it's gonna be tough, 1 or 2 pieces of blanket advice to get themselves in a better spot. When you look at the average person, how they're fueling, how they're treating their nutrition and their training, what would you say is like that 1 or 2 best pieces of advice you can give to somebody?
I would tell them not to put too much pressure on themselves, but like try to get into a routine of like 3 meals, upwards of 3 snacks per day, and just like start doing your best to at least eat consistently throughout the day. And then the second piece, if I can only give like 1 other piece, would just make sure you have carb present at every meal and snack. Yeah. Would probably be like the 2 biggest places to start if you're really not sure where to go.
Inside the running standpoint, my biggest thing right there is the fuel during your runs and practice what it is. Cause, I feel people get one part of it and then they get on into the running. And I know like we had our water bottle debate many times where I'm just like, I'm not going to bring it, Shannon. I'm not bringing a water bottle. And now I got it on every run, unfortunately.
Do you? Okay.
Not as most runs. I'm running a lot inside right now, but I think don't underestimate just using gels, even on 8-mile runs, just to prep yourself and go forward. And I wanted to mention this earlier, but I wanted to get your take on this before we're done. One thing we didn't talk about is caffeine and sport performance. I think we should talk on it because it's used everywhere. It's used in a lot of things. Yes. And I've seen people use a ton of caffeine. I've seen people dabble with it. Before we go today, let's just talk about caffeine a bit.
So caffeine can be really advantageous for performance, taken 30 to 60 minutes or in a gel form during races. However, knowing how you tolerate said caffeine is really important. So if I see a lot of runners during the race, they'll see a caffeine with gel in it and they've never tried it before. And they're like, this might help. And they take it during the race. It causes severe GI issues. They're in the porta potty for a few minutes. Now their time's really off. So I think caffeine has a place, can be advantageous. But we want to look at how much are we doing? First off, are we using it because we're exhausted or are we using it for performance enhancement? And then is it causing GI distress, increased anxiety, things like that?
With people that are going to use it as a enhancement, what type, not type, but is it 300 milligrams? Is it 400 milligrams? Is it 100 milligrams, which is roughly a cup of coffee? What's out there in the research, or is it still kind of individualized?
I think there are doses out in the research, but I hesitate to say them because they do it based off of body size, and sometimes it puts you at really high caffeine amounts. And then I start to worry about people's cardiovascular health. You're already putting a lot of pressure on your heart, even in running. I know NCAA has a rule, if you're over 500 milligrams of caffeine within 2 to 3 hours and they test you, you could be suspended from your sport. So I tell people just practice with, I'm not a big fan of doing the energy drinks. I think it's a really big dose, in a very small amount. I'm not a big fan of that, but I think trialing a cup of coffee or a gel that has caffeine in it is a good place to start. But I also know people are going to keep using energy drinks, so just be careful of how many of those you're having a day and pay attention to your body symptoms with that.
Yeah, those damn Celsius, they get me every time.
Yeah, I bet.
I have a funny story about that. We can end with this, which is when I did Ironman Lake Placid, it's 2010 or something. I wasn't tracking what I was doing. And you would think I would know, but I had everything dialed in. But all of a sudden, I just had this idea I'm going to do caffeine, but I'm not even going to pay attention to what I'm doing. So it was a mixture of occasional caffeine pill and a drink and all these different things. Come to it, at the end of the day, I was so sick. I finished the finish line, was in the porta potty, and didn't sleep that night. And I was laying in bed. I just did an Ironman, didn't sleep the entire night. I had 18 cups worth of coffee during that race, and I was so sick. So it's definitely not the recommended dosage. Definitely not 18 cups of coffee.
It's definitely not. Another thing I should mention after you said that, caffeine's also a diuretic. So if you already struggle to drink water and then you're throwing a bunch of caffeine in, you are going to become severely dehydrated throughout that as well.
Yeah.
So
we didn't even talk about hydration. That's a whole nother thing we could talk about at some point. But I think this is a great place to kind of put a pin in. You don't, again, like I said at the start, there's so much people are just hyping how dialed in you have to be. I think the foundation is what you mentioned, is solid nutrition is the foundation, adding on where you can and making sure you're getting enough. For people who want to either work with you, learn more about you, where should they go? Should they go to social? I know you got the bump a new social page you're putting up. Where should they go?
Social is, so my social is sports dietitian Shannon. But if you wanted to contact me more immediately, you can email me. I can give you my email, or Steve can put it in the notes.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes, and we'll tag your social page and then anything else that you want to put in there. So we'll put it in there. So I appreciate you joining us today, and thank you, Shannon.
For having me. Thank you.
The Buffalo Marathon Podcast is presented by our official training partner, Run Smart. Whether you're training for the full marathon, the half, or the 5K, the Run Smart app helps you train smarter with plans and guidance built by physical therapists who understand runners. From your first run to race weekend, Run Smart helps you show up prepared. Head to the App Store and download the Run Smart app today.